What is up, my fifth graders? It's time to do some more reading. Last time, I think we're on a weekend right now, so you guys haven't read for a couple days. Remember last time he found that letter from Miss Peregrine, and he's starting to think like maybe she could be alive. Not really sure. Hopefully we're gonna finish chapter 2 today. This has been like the longest chapter ever. I wanna get through chapter 2 so we can see what happens next. So praise that we finish chapter 2 today. Let's dive right in. All right, setting my alarm. Okay. You guys see that? Alrighty. As you can imagine, convincing my parents to let me spend part of my summer on a tiny island off the coast of Wales was no easy task. They, particularly my mother, had many compelling reasons why this was a wretched idea, including the cost. The fact that I was supposed to spend my summer with Uncle Bobby learning how to run a drug empire, and that I had no one to accompany me, since neither of my parents had any interest in going, and I certainly couldn't go alone. So he's trying to convince his parents to let him go to the island to see if Miss Peregrine is still there. Obviously, his parents are like, no. 1, it costs a lot of money. 2, you're supposed to be spending your summer with Uncle Bobby. And 3, we don't want to go with you. So let's see if he convinces them. Okay. I had no effective rebuttals, and my reason for wanting to make the trip, I think I'm supposed to, wasn't something I could explain without sounding even crazier than they already feared I was. I certainly wasn't going to tell my parents about Grandpa Portman's last words, or the letter, or the photo. They would have had me committed. The only sane-sounding arguments I could come up with were things like, I want to learn more about our family history, and the never persuasive, Chad Kramer and Josh Bell are going to Europe this summer, why can't I? I brought these up as frequently as possible without seeming desperate, even once resorting to, it's not like you don't have the money, a tactic I instantly regretted, but it looked like it wasn't going to happen. So he can't say to his parents, like, I got this letter from Grandpa, because they'll think that he's crazy. So he's trying to just say things like, I want to learn more about our family history. Then several things happened that helped my case enormously. First, Uncle Bobby got cold feet about spending my spending the summer with him, because who wants a nutcase living in their house? So my schedule was suddenly wide open. Next, my dad learned that Cairnholm Island is a super important bird habitat, and like half the world's population of some bird that gives him total ornithology border lives there. He started talking about his new hypothetical bird book, which whenever the subject came up, I did my best to encourage him and sound interested. But the most important factor was Dr. Golan. After a surprisingly minimal amount of coaxing by me, he shocked us all by not only signing off on the idea, but also encouraging my parents to let me go. It could be important for him, he told my mother after a session one afternoon. It's a place that's been so mythologized by his grandfather that visiting could only serve to demystify it. He'll see that it's just as normal and unmagical as any place else, and by extension, his grandfather's fantasies will lose their power. It could be a highly effective way of combating fantasy with reality. But I thought he already didn't believe that stuff, my mother said, turning to me. Do you, Jake? I don't, I assured her. Not consciously he doesn't, Dr. Golan said. But it's his unconscious that's causing him problems right now, the dreams, the anxiety. And you really think going there could help? My mother said, narrowing her eyes at him as if readying herself to hear the unvarnishing truth. When it came to things I should or should not be doing, Dr. Golan's word was law. I do, he replied, and that was all it took. So Dr. Golan is saying that he should go. So now his mother is kind of being convinced. After that, things fell into place with astonishing speed. Plane tickets were bought, schedules scheduled, plans laid. My dad and I would go for 3 weeks in June. I wondered if that was too long, but he claimed he needed at least that much time to make a thorough study of the island's bird colonies. I thought Mom would object. 3 whole weeks? But the closer our trip got, the more excited she got for us. My 2 men, she would say, beaming, off on a big adventure. I found her enthusiasm kind of touching, actually, until the afternoon I overheard her talking on the phone to a friend, venting about how relieved she'd be to have her life back for 3 weeks and to not have two needy children to worry about. Well, we know she doesn't have two needy children. She has a son and a husband, so she must be referring to her husband as a needy child right now. I love you too, I wanted to say with as much hurtful sarcasm as I could muster, but she hadn't seen me and I kept quiet. I did love her, of course, but mostly just because loving your mom is mandatory, not because she was someone I think I'd like very much if I met her walking down the street, which she wouldn't be anyway. Walking is for poor people. During the 3-week window between the end of school and the start of our trip, I did my best to verify that Miss Alma LaFay Peregrine still resided among the living, but internet searches turned up nothing. Assuming she was still alive, I had hoped to get her on the phone and at least warn her that I was coming, but I soon discovered that almost no one on Cairnholm even had a phone. I found only one number for the entire island, so that's the one I dialed. It took nearly a minute to connect, the line hissing and clicking, going quiet and then hissing again, so that I could feel every mile of the vast distance my call was spanning. Finally, I heard that strange European ring, wah, 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 and a man who I could only assume was profoundly intoxicated answered the phone. That was an unholy amount of noise in the background, the kind of dull roar you'd expect at the height of a raging frat party. I tried to identify myself, but I don't think he could hear me. Hello, he bellowed again. Who's this now? But before I could say anything, he'd pull the receiver away from his head to shout at someone. I said, shut up, I'm on the... And then the line went dead. I sat with the receiver to my ear for a long, puzzled moment. Then I hung up. I didn't bother calling back. If Cairnholm's only phone connected to some den of iniquity called, how did that bode for the rest of the island? Would my first trip to Europe be spent evading maniacs and watching birds evacuate their bowels on rocky beaches? Maybe so. But if it meant that I'd finally be able to put my grandfather's mystery to rest and get on with my unextraordinary life, anything I had to endure would be worth it. And that's the end of chapter 2. We still have time to read more today, so I'm going to keep reading. But really quick, just to recap, he's trying to call Miss Peregrine to let her know, like, hey, I'm, this person's grandson. I'm going to come and visit you. I want to learn more about him. But there's only one phone on the island, which is pretty unordinary. It's pretty not ordinary for that, because you guys know nowadays, there's phones everywhere. So he got in touch with one person. There's like a party going on in the background. No one could hear, and so they hung up. So he is just gonna go, and I think just hope for the best. So let's get started with chapter 3 while we still have time. How you guys liking it? Good so far? Yeah? Cool. All right. Hopefully he'll get to the island in this chapter. Fog closed around us like a blindfold. When the captain announced that we were nearly there, at first I thought he was kidding. All I could see was the ferry's rolling deck. From the ferry's rolling deck was an endless curtain of gray. I clutched the rail and stared into the green waves, contemplating the fish, who might soon be enjoying my breakfast, while my father stood shivering beside me in shirt sleeves. It was colder and wetter than I'd ever known June could be. I hoped, for his sake and mine, that the grueling 36 hours we'd braved to get this far, 3 airplanes, 2 layovers, shift napping, and grubby train stations, and now this gut-churning ferry ride would pay off. Then my father shouted, "Look!" And I raised my head to see a towering mountain of rock emerge from the blank canvas before us. It was my grandfather's island, looming and bleak, folded in mist, guarded by a million screeching birds. It looked like some ancient fortress constructed by giants. As I gazed up at its sheer cliffs, tops disappearing in a reef of ghostly clouds, the idea that this was a magical place didn't seem so ridiculous. So they're finally there after a bunch of traveling. And when it says that it's guarded by a million screeching birds, remember, these are just normal birds right now. His father is a scientist that studies birds, and he heard that this island has a lot of birds there. So he's going to just study all of these birds, and that's what they're seeing right now, just a bunch of birds on the island. They're very normal birds right now. These are not any of the monsters or anything like that. My nausea seemed to vanish. Dad ran around like a kid on Christmas, his eyes glued to the birds wheeling above us. Jacob, look at that! He cried, pointing to a cluster of airborne specks. Manx shearwaters! I'm assuming that's the name of a bird. As we drew nearer the cliffs, I began to notice the odd shapes lurking underwater. A passing crewman caught me leaning over the rail to stare at them and said, "Never seen a shipwreck before, eh?" I turned to him. Really? This whole area is a nautical graveyard. It's like the old captains used to say, "Twixt Hartland Point and Cairnholm Bay is a sailor's grave by night or day." He's looking underneath the water right now. They're passing over a shipwreck. Just then, we passed a wreck that was so near the surface, the outline of its greening carcass so clear, that it looked like it was about to rise out of the water like a zombie from a shallow grave. "See that one?" he said, pointing at it. "Sunk by a U-boat, she was." There were U-boats around here? Loads. Whole Irish Sea was rotten with German subs. Wager you'd have half a navy on your hands if you could unsink all the ships they torpedoed. He arched one eyebrow dramatically, then walked off laughing. I jogged along the deck to the stern, tracking the shipwreck as it disappeared beneath our wake. Then, just as I was starting to wonder if we'd need climbing gear to get onto the island, its steep cliffs sloped down to meet us. We rounded a headland to enter a rocky half-moon bay. In the distance, I saw a little harbor bobbing with colorful fishing boats, and beyond it, a town set in a green bowl of land. A patchwork of sheep-speckled fields spread across the hills that rose away to meet a high ridge, where a wall of clouds stood like a cotton parapet. It was dramatic and beautiful, unlike any place I'd ever seen. I felt a little thrill of adventure as we chugged into the bay, as if I were sighting land where maps had noted only a sweep of undistinguished blue. They finally got there, and the way he described the setting here is pretty amazing. He used a lot of colors, description words. So basically they're going into this bay. He sees a lot of fishing boats. Behind it is kind of like just a little town. Behind that is like some fields, and then there's like some rocky mountains in the background. The ferry docked, and we humped our bags into the little town. Upon closer inspection, I decided it was, like a lot of things, not as pretty up close as it seemed from a distance. It's funny. Whitewashed cottages, quaint except for the satellite dishes sprouting from the roofs, lined a small grid of muddy gravel streets. Because Cairnholm was too distant and too inconsequential to justify the cost of running power lines. I think I hear my dog outside whining. I might have to go let her inside, but I'm gonna keep reading because I don't know if it's her or not. The cost of power lines from the mainland. Foul-smelling diesel generators buzzed on every corner like angry wasps, harmonizing with the growl of tractors, the island's only vehicular traffic. They only have tractors to get around. They don't have cars. They don't have like cable wires because they said it was too expensive to bring the wires over from the mainland. So this is a pretty like there's people who live on this island, but they don't have a lot of things that we have now, like cable, internet, telephones, things like that. So don't mistake that with the time period. We are in a present day time period right now. It's just a different type of island that doesn't have the types of things that we're used to. Okay. We dragged our stuff through town looking for something called the Priest Home, where my dad had booked a room. I pictured an old church converted into a bed and breakfast. Nothing fancy, just somewhere to sleep when we weren't watching birds or chasing down leads. We asked a few locals for directions, but got only confused looks in return. "They speak English, right?" my dad wondered aloud. Just as my hand was beginning to ache from the weight of my suitcase, we came upon a church. We thought we found our accommodations until we went inside that it had indeed been converted, but into a dingy little museum, not a B&B. We found the part-time curator in the room, hung with old fishing nets and sheep shears. His face lit up when he saw us, then fell when he realized we were only lost. They're in an old church right now that is transformed into a museum, but they are looking for an old church that is converted into a bread and breakfast. bed and breakfast. I reckon you're after the priest's hole, he said. It's got the only rooms to let on the island. He proceeded to give us directions in a lilting accent, which I found enormously entertaining. I loved hearing Welsh people talk, even if half of what it said was incomprehensible to me. My dad thanked the man and turned to go, but he'd been so helpful, I hung back to ask him another question. Where can we find the old children's home? Old what? He said, squinting at me. For a moment, I was afraid we'd come to the wrong island, or worse yet, that the home was just another thing my grandfather had invented. It was a home for refugee kids, I said. During the war, a big house. The timer just went off, so let's see how much longer we have. Okay, there's a good break in the middle of the chapter, so I'll get to that break and then we'll stop there. Okay, couple more pages. The man chewed his lip and regarded me doubtfully, as if deciding whether to help or to wash his hands of the whole thing. But he took pity on me. I don't know about any refugees, he said, but I think I know the place you mean. It's way up on the other side of the island, past the bog and through the woods, though I wouldn't go mucking about there alone if I was you. Stray too far from the path and that's the last. Anyone will hear of you. Nothing but wet grass and sheep patties to keep you from going straight over a cliff. That's good to know, my dad said, eyeing me. Promise me you won't go by yourself. All right, all right. What's your interest in it anyhow? The man said. It's not exactly on the tourist maps. Just a little genealogy project, my father replied, lingering near the door. My dad spent several years there as a kid. I could tell he was eager to avoid any mention of psychiatrists or dead grandfathers. He thanked the man again and quickly ushered me out the door. Following the curator's directions, we retraced our steps until we came to a grim-looking statue carved from black stone, a memorial called the Waiting Woman, dedicated to islanders lost at sea. She wore a pitiful expression and stood with arms outstretched in the direction of the harbor, many blocks away, but also towards the priest hole, which was directly across the street. Now, I'm no hotel connoisseur, but one glance at the weathered sign told me that our stay was unlikely to be a 4-star mince-on-your-pillow type experience. Printed in giant script at the top was wines, ales, spirits. Below that, in more modest lettering, fine food. Handwritten along the bottom, clearly an afterthought, was rooms to let, although the S had been struck out, leaving just the singular room. That's funny. As we lugged our bags towards the door, my father grumbled about conmen and false advertising. I glanced back at the waiting woman and wondered if she wasn't just waiting for someone to bring her a drink. We squeezed our bags through the doorway and stood blinking in the sudden gloom of a low-ceilinged pub. When my eyes had adjusted, I realized that hole was a pretty accurate description of the place. Tiny leaded windows admitted just enough light to find the beer tap without tripping over tables and chairs on the way. The tables, worn and wobbling, looked like they might be more useful as firewood. The bar was half filled at whatever hour of the morning it was. You must be after our room, said the man behind the bar, coming out to shake our hands. I'm Kev, and these are the fellas. Say hello, fellas. Hello, they muttered, nodding at their drinks. We followed Kev up a narrow staircase to the suite of rooms, plural, that could charitably be described as basic. There were 2 bedrooms, the larger of which Dad claimed, and a room that tripled as a kitchen, dining room, and living room meant that it contained 1 table, 1 moth-eaten sofa, and 1 hot plate. The bathroom worked most of the time, according to Kev, but if it ever gets dicey, there's always old reliable. He directed our attention to a portable toilet in the alley out back, conveniently visible from my bedroom window. Oh my goodness. And you'll need these, he said, fetching a pair of oil lamps from a cabinet. The generator stopped running at 10 since petrol's so bloody expensive to ship out. So either you get to bed early or you learn to love candles and kerosene, he said. Hope it ain't too medieval for you. We assured Kev that outhouses and kerosene would be just fine. Sounded like fun, in fact, a little adventure, yes, sir. And then he led us downstairs for the final leg of our tour. You're welcome to take your meals here, he said, and I expect you will, on account of there's nowhere else to eat. If you need to make a call, we got a phone box in the corner there. Sometimes there's a bit of a queue for it though, since we get doodly for mobile reception out here, and you're looking at the only landline on the island. That's right, we got it all. Only food, only bed, only phone. And he leaned back and laughed, long and loud. That must be the phone that Jacob called earlier. The only phone on the island. I looked over at it. It was the kind that had a door that you could pull shut for privacy, like the ones you see in old movies, and realized with dawning horror that this was the raging party that I had been connected to when I called the Evan a few days ago. Kev handed my dad the keys to our room. Any questions? He said. You know where to find me. I have a question, I said. What's a priest hole? The men at the bar burst into laughter. Why, it's a hole for priests, of course, one said, which made the rest of them laugh even harder. Kev walked to an uneven patch of floorboards next to the fireplace, where a mangy dog lay sleeping. Right here, he said, tapping what appeared to be a door in the floor with his shoe. Ages ago, when just being a Catholic could get you hung from a tree, clergy folk came here seeking refuge. If Queen Elizabeth's crew of thugs came chasing after, we hid whoever needed hiding in a snug little spot like this, priest holes. It struck me the way he said we, as if he'd known those long-dead islanders personally. Snug indeed, one of the drinkers said. Bet they were warm as toast and tight as drums down there. I'd take warm and snug to strung up by priest killers any day, said another. Hear, hear, the first man said. To Cairnholm, may she always be our rock of refuge. To Cairnholm, they chorused. And they raised their glasses together. And that's where our break is. So we will stop there today. Let me mark my page. We're going to stop there today and find out what happens next in the island. So it's the beginning of chapter 3 was just a little slow, but I think that the author needed to give us a lot of details about the island so that we understood kind of why it was dangerous for him to be there, why going out to Miss Peregrine's home was going to be dangerous for him. The guy in the museum told him that he better be careful because he could fall over a cliff. So remember, it's a very rocky terrain. So I think the author had to start chapter 3 a little bit slower because they had to give us the background information on this island in order for us to really understand everything else that Jacob is going to go through. So thanks guys for reading with me today. I loved watching all of your work from last week, especially when I asked you guys how you felt about the book, because I think a lot of you are really enjoying it. So thanks for reading along. I hope you enjoyed today's chapter, and we'll see what happens next tomorrow. Bye-bye.